I am super excited to have you here. My name is Abdusalam Kaberat. This is the face behind 360-degree baking explore. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so happy that you are here with me this evening. So, this evening I will be talking about homemade bread, how to make homemade bread. According to my post about a few days ago, I made a post that this live session was going to come up. So thank you so much for being here with me. So I'm going to start directly. How to make homemade bread. What is homemade bread? Homemade bread is just like the regular bread. It is homemade. That is why it is called homemade. Like you made the bread yourself. You made the bread yourself, you didn't buy it. That is what homemade bread is. Now we are going to move now to the recipes for making homemade bread. If you want to make your homemade bread, you have to get your flour, your regular wheat flour, or your plain flour or your white flour, as you call it, sugar, you have bread improver, you have your margarine, you have your butter or your margarine, you have your egg. This is optional. You could add your milk powder or liquid milk or water, your nutmeg, your yeast, your salt, and so on and so forth. So those are the ingredients on how to make homemade bread. The ingredients are going to use for making homemade bread. You can also add your bread improver, EDC. EDC is a kind of bread improver that could be in powder or liquid form. It is mostly used in the industrial making of bread, because it assists the yeast to make the bread rise very well. It makes your dough stretchy, it makes the bread rise well, it improves the stability, and it also serves as preservative for the bread. So now let's move on to how to make the bread. The process of making your own meat bread. First, you have to get your plain flour, sieve your flour in a bowl. This is just to remove unwanted particles in your flour. Then after, then you add all your dry ingredients. Your dry ingredients include your yeast, your sugar, your salt, your milk powder, your nutmeg. These are your dry ingredients. And after, then just mix them gently together, then begin adding your water. If you want to get the full video of how to make homemade bread, there are some of my videos here on Facebook. Just check them out in the shorts. You are going to see how I make my homemade bread. So mix them together, then begin to add your liquid milk or your egg or your water little by little to make your dough. Then after that, you knead for a few minutes, after which you add your margarine or your butter or your oil. You don't add your oil or your margarine in your flour. So this is just to assist the yeast. It's going to affect the action, the activities of the yeast if you add your fat directly into the flour. So it is better you add it into the dough rather than into the flour. Then you go ahead to knead for a few minutes, and after which you add your fat or your margarine. Knead again for about 5 to 10 minutes. I'll advise you take your time to knead your dough very well, because the more you knead, the fluffier and the softer and the finer your final outcome, which is your bread, becomes. And after then, you place it in your baking pan, allow it to rise, allow it to double in size. Preheat your oven or your local oven or your pot or whatever you want to use in making your bread. And after then, you bake in your oven for about 130 degree for 45 minutes, or under very low heat with your pot. Or if you are baking with a cooking gas, or maybe if you're in Nigeria and you are baking with a cooking gas, you have to bake under very low heat for about 1 hour. Then your bread is super ready. Now we're going to move next to the next subheading of this live webinar, which is bread fault, their causes and prevention. When making your bread, you could accompany some, you could face some challenges, or your bread, you could have some issues with your bread. So I'm going to mention few of them so you know what causes them and their prevention. Now the first thing is you could realize, or you could be faced with the challenges of your dough not rising properly. your bread do not rising properly. This could be as a result of your yeast. Your yeast might not be active, or it could be dead. So I'll advise that before you use your yeast, if you are not sure if the yeast is active or not, make sure you proof your yeast first. Prove it by adding the quantity of the yeast you want to use in a small bowl. Add a small quantity of sugar and warm water to it. So once it's cover it up, yeah, once it foams, then you're going to know that the yeast is very active. Then you can go ahead and add it into your flour to use. Another cause it could be as an environmental, it could be environmental factor. Maybe the environment is cold. When you're in the cold weather, the environment is humid, so your dough might not rise well because yeast loves it. It loves a hot environment. So what you can actually do is that you can prove your yeast in your oven, or just basically warm a little quantity of water in your kitchen and place your dough inside it, just to make sure that it gets a lot of hot temperature for it to be able to rise. Another cause could be excess sugar. In as much as yeast loves sugar, yeast operates like yeast. Sugar is the food for yeast. Sugar is the food for yeast. Yeast loves sugar, but once the sugar is too much, because the yeast will ferment the sugar to make your dough rise and give it that fluffiness and that that fluffiness that makes it bread. That's exactly the process that goes. So in as much as sugar is the food for yeast, if the sugar is too much, the yeast is gonna die. This is gonna die. So do not use excess sugar. Make sure you follow strictly your recipes. I have said check my video again and see the full procedures for making your homemade bread. Do not use excess sugar. Excess fat too will not allow your dough to rise because it's going to shorten the gluten content in the flour. So these are the things you are actually going to use. You can also use warm water to mix your dough depending on your environment. Depending on your environment. When you are in the summer period, whenever the environment is cold, use warm water to mix. Another fault is when you could have a soft or sticky dough. When your bread dough is too soft or it is too sticky, it is too soft, it is too sticky. As a first timer, it is possible that you make that mistake, that your dough is too soft or too sticky. So this is caused by excess water or excess liquid while mixing your dough. Definitely, if the water is too much, it's going to be too soft. So you added excess yeast. Excess yeast will make the dough to over ferment. So the fermentation will just be ongoing. And once the fermentation is ongoing, it makes the bread softer. It could be as a result of excess yeast or excess bread improver. Bread improver, like I've said before, for example, EDC will assist the yeast, makes the yeast active. When you add excess of it, the yeast will be overactive, so it's going to affect the final outcome of your dough. So another Another thing you can actually do is to add more flour to reduce the stickiness. Add more flour to reduce the stickiness. Reduce the rising time and bake as early as possible. Since the dough is too soft, bake as early as possible. Now we move another Another fault you could encounter when you're making your bread is a flat baked bread. A flat baked bread, you realize that after baking your bread, it did not rise, it did not come out in a favorable shape or in a fine or beautiful shape as you have expected. So this could be as a result of low volume of dough as compared to the size of the pan. So when you use a low volume of dough, when you put a small quantity of dough in a large pan, of course the dough is going to be too small for it to cover all the spaces in the pan, so it's going to be an issue. So make sure you use the right size of the baking pan or right size of your bread pan according to the size of the dough that you want to do. One thing you could do is just make sure that your dough touches every part of the pan. So once it's rising, it's going to cover all the pan and give you a beautiful shape. Now, if your bread dough is flat, the final outcome is definitely going to be flat. So once you have a flat dough, you have a flat bread. So make sure that your bread rises before placing it in the oven. Make sure that your bread rises very well before placing it in the oven. Use appropriate pan size. I have said. So these are the ways you can actually make sure that you achieve the desirable, beautiful shape of bread. Another challenges, another bread fault that you could face is non-fluffy or soft bread. What makes bread fine, what makes bread attractive, what makes you want to consume that bread is the softness and the fluffiness. And after baking, you realize that it is all crumbling and it's not soft, it is not that could be disappointing and undesirable. So what could cause this is as a result of too much of fiber. Too much of fiber. What do I mean by this? In as much as you want to, for example, you want to make healthy bread. There was a time I was trying to make an healthy bread recipe, so I added excess of coconut flour. Coconut contains a lot of fiber, and I realized that it just became crumbling. It was not soft. The texture wasn't okay. So you want to add any type of fiber into your bread, so make sure it is in moderacy. And also lack of proper kneading. If you don't knead your bread very well, it's not going to come out soft. If you observe that, if you're a baker and you're listening to me right now, you observe that the more you knead the bread, the softer it becomes, and the more it rises. So as it rises, it becomes fluffy. As you knead, the yeast is going to be happy. It will make the yeast more active. So once the yeast is active, it's going to ferment the sugar. Once it ferments the sugar, it creates a sort of alcohol and gas. It's the gas bubbles that is formed in the dough that makes it rise and makes it soft. So once you bake, the gas bubbles, I once you bake and your bread absorbed it, the gas bubbles are going to break. So it's going to make your bread fluffy and light. So it has to do with how your bread rises. It has to do with how your bread rises. So make sure you knead your dough very well for you to get a soft bread. And also inadequate quantity of fat or margarine. Yes. So in as much as you shouldn't add excess fats or excess oil into your margarine, if it is absent or it is not enough, it's not going to make your bread soft. So I recently made a bread recipe. I've not uploaded it yet on YouTube. I'm going to upload it sooner or later. So make sure that you subscribe and you turn on the notification bell so that whenever I upload the bread recipe, you get notified. It's a healthy bread recipe. In fact, I didn't use margarine and it came out soft. I used something different. So make sure you subscribe and turn your notification bell so that you get notified whenever I upload the healthy homemade bread recipe. So when you use inadequate quantity of fat, it's not going to make your bread soft. Another issue could be that your dough is too hard. Your bread dough is too hard. If your bread dough is too hard, definitely you cannot have a soft bread. So make sure your bread dough is soft, it is elastic, it is easily workable, it is stretchy. So that will give you a beautiful final outcome for of your bread. I hope you are enjoying this. If you are enjoying this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to share. You can just click on the share button, copy the link and share it to your social media and so that others are going to benefit from it. Thank you so much once again for watching. Now let us proceed. Let's proceed. The third point is, like, the third subheading is healthier ways to make your bread. This is homemade bread, and of course you should be able to be creative with it, be able to be flexible with it. You should be able to be to make it healthy for yourself and your family. I am an advocate of eating healthy and snacking healthy. This is homemade bread, so you have all the freedom to get creative or use whatever type of recipe you want. So we're going to go into it direct. Now the first way you can actually make your homemade bread healthy is use whole wheat flour. Whole wheat flour, the regular wheat grain that we consume if you're in Nigeria, for example, even if you're not in Nigeria, you know the regular wheat grain. If you want to know how to make whole wheat flour, just check any of my videos in the shorts. You're going to see how I made my whole wheat flour, so after then, use whole wheat flour to make your bread. Now the difference between the whole wheat flour and the normal or the regular white flour that we use for bread is that the whole wheat flour contains the entire grain, and none of the part of the grain has been removed before it was processed or blended. It doesn't contain any form of preservative, doesn't contain any form of chemicals. It is blended whole. So the whole wheat grain contains the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Now the bran and the germ contains a lot of nutrients, a lot of vitamins, healthy fats, and vitamin E, while the endosperm is the starchy part. So for the plain flour or the white flour contains mostly the starchy part, which is the endosperm. So that is what makes the whole wheat flour healthier than the white wheat flour. So if you are on keto diet, or you are looking to reduce your consumption of sugar or consumption of starch, you should go for whole wheat flour to make your wheat bread. Whole wheat flour to make your bread. Whole wheat flour to make whole wheat bread, which is very interesting. I have a recipe for whole wheat bread. Like I've said, just subscribe and turn your notification bell. You're going to see, so that again, whenever you upload the bread recipe. So if you are looking to reduce sugar consumption, or you're a diabetic patient, then use whole wheat flour. It is healthier, it contains more nutrients, it contains more fiber that can reduce your blood sugar, that can assist you in weight loss. So consider trying your whole wheat flour. So another method you could use to make your homemade bread healthy is add other natural food products like tiger nuts, like coconut, like peanuts. All this contains nutrients and high quantity of fiber. For the coconut, you could use their milk or their shafts. The same thing for the tiger nut. So it makes it more nutritious. It increases the fiber and the nutrient and the overall taste of your bread. So it makes it healthier for consumption. It makes it more fun to consume and fun to produce. Another method you could use is reduce the quantity of added sugar. The normal sugar we consume, the white sugar, is the added sugar, the sucrose. So reduce the quantity of the added sugar, or you use alternative sweetener like honey, like dates, like maple syrup. These are alternative sweetener that does not increase the glycemic index. Like, what do I mean by this is that does not increase your blood sugar. They have low glycemic index, which means they cannot increase your blood sugar level. So try using alternative sweeteners to make your homemade bread. So another way you could actually make your homemade bread healthy is use healthy unsaturated fats. Use healthy fats like margarine, like peanut oil. Peanut oil is unsaturated and it's very healthy. Add healthy bread. Add healthy oil rather. So use healthy fats to process your bread, and also reduce the quantity of fat as much as possible. If you use butter is fat from animal source, while margarine is fat from plant source. So vegetable fat is more preferable, it's more recommended than butter, which is from the animal source. So another way you could also make your bread healthy, and this is the last but not the least point, because I didn't plan to waste much of your time here. And last but not the least point is for you to get creative. Get creative with making this bread. It's a homemade bread. You make it in your home, so get creative with it to make it healthier. So you can decide to use spices like gingerbread. Use spices like ginger. Go ahead and try other recipes like chocolate bread, like carrot bread, and so on and so forth. So these are the ways for you that you can make your homemade bread healthy, sumptuous, and fun to make. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this live session. If you are watching the replay, or you're watching me right now, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe and share this video if you really like it. And to if you need to you want to have a one-on-one consultation with me, or you want to get in contact with me, so feel free to send me a message right there in the comment section, or send a message to me on my email address. I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. Till I come your way again next time, this is 360-degree baking explore. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section. I'll sure attend to them. Thank you for watching, lovelies. Bye bye. See you next time.